There was a controversy during the week when the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne cancelled a panel discussion on the effects of war on children's health. And this was scheduled as part of the hospital's weekly professional development program. And this was cancelled just a few days before it was meant to take place. And that cancellation came after a Sydney psychiatrist, Dr. Doran Samuel, claimed that the event would cause moral injury and vicarious trauma to Jewish staff and patients. Now, there's no evidence provided to back up this claim. There's no indication of how or why this moral injury would happen to Jewish staff and child patients. It was just a one letter of complaint, and without showing any backbone at all or standing up to these people, the hospital decided to cancel the event. And this just continues that process of bending to the wishes of the Zionist movement and the Israel lobby, where CEOs of these public institutions decide that it's better to look like a fool and work against the interests of the public than to stand up to these people and just acquiesce to their demands. And Doran Samuel, he also campaigned for the Liberal Party in the seat of Reid, just around the corner, during the last federal election. He's a right-wing troublemaker, and he was going around during the last federal election campaign calling the Australian Greens Nazis and urged the Liberal Party to do the same and let everyone know about this claim. And this is the sort of person that the Royal Children's Hospital has acquiesced to. And doctors and health professionals have reacted to this cancellation with outrage, as they rightly should be, calling this interference as an attack on academic freedom and medical freedom, and saying that it's a lost opportunity to better understand how war shapes the trauma of children. And there's many children in Australia who have lived through war in Africa and in Middle Eastern regions, and being able to apply any information from experts in the field would be able to help these children. But that's never going to be good enough for the Zionist lobby, because everything that they think will make them look bad or the state of Israel to look bad. And I think that killing children and babies just does tend to make a country look pretty bad. But whatever the case is, it all just needs to be closed down. And it's not just the one panel that is the issue or the one hospital. It's that principle of whether open discussion on difficult issues that a small group of people don't like can survive this sort of political pressure.
There are several wars going on in the world today. There always are. And there will always be children affected from them. And Australia is going to get refugee children from various wars. And so it's important for a hospital to be able to deal with the issues that might come up from here. So having a panel on the effects of war on children is something that should be a scientifically valid, health-aware, educational panel. There may have been other quieter phone calls that we haven't heard about that pushed it in, but we can't stop public discourse. Now, if the panel was something like Jewish people kill babies in war, I could understand that and would support that panel being torn down. But as far as I understand, it was a general discussion which would have covered Gaza, but it would have covered Cambodia and...
Well, it would have covered everything, Syria, Darfur, South Sudan. So a whole lot of areas, not just Gaza.
Not just Gaza. And of course, if you don't want to discuss something, it's not usually a sign that you feel comfortable and right in your approaches to things. And I think that the CEOs, any CEO who has folded to this type of minor pressure should go. They're clearly not up to the job of making decisions. And that's a hard thing to say, but look at the ABC. The senior management was rightly cleaned out after the Antoinette Lattouf incident, where people complained about a woman who was merely reading a script. I know of schools who have sacked music teachers because the music teachers have had discussions online without mentioning the school. And those boards, those people, and the complaints came from people not affiliated with the school, by the way. So there's a campaign out there to get rid of any dissent. It's completely un-Australian.
Well, it's completely un-Australian and it's completely unacceptable. But this has also become this terrible pattern of behaviour within Australia's cultural and academic life. And it's not just happening in Australia. It's actually far worse in the United States and in the UK as well. But it's that pattern of silencing, erasure, self-censorship. And it's been ramped up a lot since 20 23. And this event at the Royal Children's Hospital, someone in Sydney who's got no relationship with the hospital in Melbourne gets an event closed down just because it might discuss all the children that Israel has killed in Gaza. Now, there was no guarantee that's what was going to be discussed, even though it was probably a good chance that was going to be discussed. But this event was closed down just because of that possibility. But there's also other areas, David. There's the Meanjin publication in Melbourne. That's a literary publication shut down after 85 years for supposedly financial reasons by the Melbourne University, even though Melbourne University has got a surplus of $273 million. And the university is denying all of this, but essentially it's because they closed down the magazine because they published several essays critical of Israel by Jewish academics and other essays from pro-Palestine authors. And they didn't even explore options to sell it off to other publishers. They've just said, no, it's not for sale. We're keeping it. We're not going to publish it anymore, but no one else can have it. So you can't say we've closed down this magazine because it's too expensive and then not offer it for sale. And there's also $273 million in your bank account. So it's just all a pack of lies.
It costs something like $120,000 a year to run Meanjin, which is nothing. Meanjin is one of the great Australian magazines. It is one of the great journals of intellectual ideas. The four important ones, they're all important in their way, but the four big ones were, in no order, Quadrant, Southerly, Arena. Quadrant looked after the right side of politics, the conservative side in particular, but brought out some really interesting and really important. Southerly was a purely literary magazine. Arena was from the far left. It was about the new left in the original, but it's gone on to embrace other left forms of thinking as the new left became the old left. But it's the only one of the very few and the only one of the four to actively have the encouragement of new writers in its mission statement. And Meanjin introduced us to so many important writers and should have continued that tradition. They were the writers who helped define Australian culture. All of those. Meanjin's blow to what is essentially, what is alleged to be in some foreign interference is another show, if it's true, is another show of cowardice and weakness. If it is because it costs too much money, that's a sign of cowardice and weakness and how we are led by the middle
Well, they could also
classless.
sell it off, but they've decided, no, we're not going to do that at all. We're going anywhere.
It could be crowdfunded. You could get maybe somebody like, and again, I'm not putting out, I'm just the first name off the top of my head, Simon Holmes at Court could have done it, but Melbourne don't want the brand around at all. And from a Melbourne institution like Meanjin, it's just disgraceful and it's disgusting.
It's not just that particular magazine. We also had the Bendigo Writers Festival issue a couple of months ago that we discussed. Randa Abdel Fattah, she was told at the last minute that she couldn't speak about issues related to Palestine, even though that's what her writing career has been pretty much based on. The festival loses its reputation, probably won't be back next year, loses a lot of income out of it as well. There's all those other incidents. Creative Australia cancelling Lebanese artists. The National Gallery covering over artworks that contained images of the Palestinian flag. We've got institutions bending over backwards, not just creative institutions, but other public health institutions as well. We've got institutions bending over backwards to suppress anything at all to do with Palestine, just to appease Zionists and the Israel lobby, even when there's a massive financial and reputational cost to these institutions. So, David, this is not normal behaviour. Public institutions shouldn't be placing themselves in this position. And then the question is, what do they actually fear? And maybe we could look at what happened in the US with Charlie Kirk last week to see what they're really fearful of. And I'm not being frivolous or facetious about this, but it's just reached the point of the ridiculousness.
People demanding other people be sacked because they didn't grieve Charlie Kirk in the right way. Now, that was a terrible thing. But he wasn't a hero. He was a terrible human being in many ways. And we grieve his death as people who work in the discussion, realizing that even as horrible and as silly, he was still a part of the discussion. Maybe he shouldn't have been a part of the discussion, but he was. But I'm not going to say he was a great man or he was a martyr or anything like that. His words were words of violence, and violence begets violence. So, as sad as it is, if we sugarcoat what he said, what's the point? And of course, the point is that that section of the right that doesn't want discussions, that agrees with Charlie Kirk, get to own the centre of discussion. And they shouldn't be in the centre. They should be right on the fringes. And that's the problem. And that's why we have to push back against every attempt to cancel something reasonable. Now, if they had some radical saying that we should bomb and kill as many infidel as possible in the Writers' Festival, that's one thing. She doesn't say that. The Mianjin essays didn't advocate violence at all. They barely advocated protest. They just put down the case simply and clearly and fairly as to what was going wrong in Gaza. If you were on the other side of that debate, the logical would be to say, oh, no, this fact's wrong, and give the evidence as to why. You can interpret it this way, but there's also looking at it this way, and have that debate and discussion. That's not happening. So at that point, you have to ask, why? They're claiming that it's all racist, but I'm not seeing a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda. And the 20th century was full of anti-Jewish propaganda. So we know what it looks like, and we know what it smells like, and we know how to condemn it too. This was not even anti, this was pro-Palestinian, which is a slightly different thing. And the things they're getting rid of are either nothing to do with it, but might push that way, like the Children's Hospital seminar or the Writers' Festival.
The goal of the Israeli government is abundantly clear as we continue to witness the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza. The Commission finds it is genocide. In our report, the Commission found that the Israeli authorities and Israeli security forces committed and are continuing to commit the following underlying acts of genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
And in a related issue, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry has made its most damning determination yet. Israel has committed crimes against humanity in Gaza, including genocide. Now, the findings conclude that Israel has carried out 4 of the 5 acts defined as genocide under the 1948 Genocide Convention. That includes deliberate targeting of civilians, mass killings, and the systemic blocking of food, water, and medicine to create life-threatening conditions. And this isn't all a secret. It's out in the open. We've seen it happening over the past 2 years. And there's also been a warning from the United Nations that silence on this issue equals complicity, and that the governments that fail to act risk losing credibility and risk becoming complicit themselves. And I just hope that Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong are listening into all of this. And the Commissioner, Chris Sidoti, went further, rejecting Israel's claim of tragic mishaps and describing them instead as deliberate policy.
We've produced reports in the last 2 years on what happened in the first 3 months. The saturation bombing campaign, the continuing slaughter, the destruction of the healthcare facilities, the destruction of educational facilities, sex and gender-based violence, destruction of cultural properties, including mosques, churches, archaeological sites, universities, libraries, museums. We've done all that. And it's that investigation and those conclusions that enable us to say that these were genocidal acts, that they were committed intentionally. And what enabled us to make the leap from fact to genocidal purpose were the 2 things that we have highlighted. First, there is direct evidence in the statements of the Israeli leaders in positions of command responsibility. And second, there is a comprehensive, widespread, in fact Gaza-wide pattern of operations that lead to no other reasonable inference than this is occurring because of a genocidal purpose.
So I think, David, the message is pretty clear, and that's what all of these public institutions that we discussed before should be thinking about. Next time you cancel an event based on a letter of complaint from a Zionist or from the Israel lobby, essentially you are supporting a genocide, which has now been determined and confirmed by the United Nations and according to the 1948 Genocide Convention. And I'm not suggesting that all of these CEOs at these public hospitals and institutions will end up at The Hague. Maybe they should, but I'm not suggesting that's what will happen or should happen to them. But they just need to have a good look at themselves and really consider exactly what they are supporting when they cancel all of these events at the drop of a hat. And for governments, including Australia, and another big hello to Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong, they just need to make sure that they are not complicit through the sale of weapons, military exports, or just looking the other way, which is exactly what they've been doing over the past 2 years. And it is a pretty clear choice. Uphold international law and do something about this, or continue enabling the genocide to continue. It's a pretty clear choice that they've got.
Norway stopped all trade to Israel, in one of the few countries that have decided not to turn a blind eye. Now, we've said before that sometimes you have to, if not turn a blind eye, live with the fact that your larger trade partners might not be ideal in their practice of domestic politics or international politics. There comes a point where you have to say to smaller countries, this is unacceptable, this is bad, and we will give consequences based on trade and economics till you change your ways. Happened with South Africa. South Africa was horrible, but yeah, they hadn't targeted bombings on places like Soweto. And it meant that the black population had the numbers to be able to rebuild the country.
Although South Africa did bomb quite a few of the neighbouring countries in the lead up to the end of apartheid, which is similar to what Israel's doing at the moment.
And we took it seriously. There was a brilliant film on the rugby union players who decided not to play against South Africa. It cost them their career, but it was a small step, really, part of the wave. And Australia led that too. Malcolm Fraser had been a tireless advocate, and Bob Hawke was in agreement with him. That international agitation from Fraser, and Margaret Thatcher tried to be scathing of Fraser in her memoirs. She didn't quite have the wit to do the stitch-up job she clearly thought it was. But both Fraser and Hawke showed commendable principle in standing up to South Africa.